Good afternoon, Rob.
Good afternoon, Michelle.
Here we have the coordinate graph task cards. Can you tell us a little bit about
Absolutely. This is another one of those materials that I've been noticing that is taking more prominence in Montessori classrooms because I think a couple things. One is just the acknowledgement that there's a lot of math out there that was not necessarily included in the curriculum as it was originally written. And so I think with now that we've moved into the 21st century here, we're realizing that our students need to be able to work with data, and so there's like data collection. They need to work with multi-bases. There's multi-bases. I would say the coordinate graphing work is one of those that is, clearly there's a need for it, and so how do we make it in a way that's going to make sense to us as Montessorians? So this is about as abstract as it's going to get. I mean, we know that our sixth graders, our fifth and sixth graders are getting into cubing and cube rooting, and they're doing these large works, volume of a sphere, and they're doing it with concrete materials. And like I said, getting into some fairly abstract work, I think coordinate graphs would, by anyone's definition, would fall into that category. And so we have materials that we can show the child, most clearly, a chart, an XY axis, chart like this. There are presentations where I've seen teachers use pegboards and run string across the pegboard there to create an X and a Y axis, and then we can use those holes to count. So there are different ways that we can almost like physically create a coordinate graph and put beads or put pegs in that to give the understanding of it. And then also just the identifying of the quadrants. There are 4 quadrants up there. How do we name them? But for the sixth grader, for the 12-year-old, really they're getting quickly into the abstract work with a concrete foundation with the actual graph. And so we have a series of cards here that are each going to take an aspect. It's one set. There's lots of cards here, but even within the set, it's divided into a couple of different sections that are going to sort of take us from simple to the more complex, as any Montessori would do, right? So these task cards would follow the presentation that the teacher made. I've made this, and now you're going to go ahead and do it. And so we start with probably the simplest one, which is let's just do 1 point, like find 1 point on the graph and identify which quadrant it is. It moves on to here we have now we're giving you a point, and now can you find that? Can you find that on the graph? So they're almost the opposite, right? This one says let's start with this, and this shows us what the answer is going to be. This almost starts with the answer and asks what the question would be. So often what we see in good task cards like this is this doing backwards and forwards. Can you convert it this way, and now can you do it back? We're here now. We start to introduce more points, and so can you find the coordinate of the points that are shown? That are shown here. And now you're getting more. So now you've got like different points that are, because when we get into graphing, once we've gone for the point, we're starting to make patterns. We're starting to do what's the slope, and here we're going to be able to do more information. The graph is going to tell us more information. And then from here, now we've got 2 sets. Now can you plot those 2 sets? But again, it's always something that the child's going to be able to check on their own. We want all task cards, we want them to be independent. We want the child to be able to pick the work, understand the work, and also correct the work on their own. And then we move here. Now we're starting to get into like plotting an actual graph. So now you're starting to have, okay, well, we've got for 2. So how do we read this? And now we're starting to introduce a little bit more concretely the language of x-axis and y-axis, and how do we read that graph. Once we're giving a child a firm grasp of how we work on the table, now we start doing equations. And equations is really going to open up what the child's going to be doing when they're in high school. Is this kind of work, is plotting equations. And so we go from here and then to equations and understanding like, well, does this match? Like I'm giving a coordinate pair. Does this coordinate pair, which is 2, 2, does that match this equation here? And again, always the answer on the back. And then finally, as is often the case with task cards, the last one is going to be problem solving. So that way, with that last card, it's almost like third period. Can you take all the lessons that you've gleaned here, all the experiences that you've had here, and can you apply it? And that's, for me, that's what always a problem-solving card is can you apply the knowledge towards something that's a real-life situation. Also, and finally, a nice little booklet for the child. Again, with older children here, I think as you're starting to move into that third plane of development, and they obviously are moving away from those materials, I think it can often be nice for a child to have like their own booklet. So all things in moderation, but I think it's a great idea.